This is Breaking Down Security, and I am Brian Brake. Welcome back, listener. This is Brian and Mr. Vetcher for Breaking Down Security.
What up?
Oh my goodness, that was a great week. So, by the time you guys listen to this, it'll be a week and a half since DerbyCon. But yeah, we had a blast this year at DerbyCon.
Yeah, and the thing that separates DerbyCon from a lot of security conventions is the concentration of really good talent there. You know, you go to DEF CON and there's tons of people. There's a lot of talent there, but it's not so concentrated, right?
Yeah.
Wow. Just a who's who of InfoSec.
Yeah, it
was there, and the hallway con was just amazing.
Yeah, I loved it. I loved it so much. We, of course, you guys heard Oseman at Circati on Twitter. We had holy balls, playful, quit blowing me up. Oh, I know why. Okay, let me minimize that and just do not disturb. Yeah, I know. We're okay. Give me an hour.
Are we still live?
No, we're not live. Please. No, I just had to set the alarm thing. So, yeah, I don't know, like we were talking about, I don't know if it was different this year because people actually knew us more or whatever, but people seemed more friendly. The weather was just fantastic for it. It was, mid 80s. It wasn't too hot for me, but that's because I enjoy seeing the Daystar. The talks were fantastic. I saw several talks. I saw not Jessica McAvoy. What's InfoSister Amanda Berlin, and of course Lee couldn't be there, but her talk on inheriting a security office. What do you do now? That was a great talk about what you do when you're working with an already existing security group, and now you're kind of stuck. So how do you come back from that? So that was a good one. Beowulf88 on Twitter, Jay Huff, his OSINT talk was fantastic as well. I learned a lot about, so one of the slides on his thing was he showed a picture of a gas station, guy showing how much he paid for a gallon of gas or something. And he was like, okay, what can we infer from this guy? And he's like, well, he obviously was, taking advantage of, really cheap gas, but what else can we learn? And he's like, well, if you look in the reflection of the picture, on the plastic of the gas station, you can see his car or his truck in this case. And he was talking about how you take the tail light and you can Google for tail lights of trucks look like SUVs and everything. And he's like, yep, we can tell that this person drives anywhere between a 2006 to 2010 Dodge Durango, and it appears to be some kind of gray color. And I was like, oh my God, okay. This must be how they do stuff, not just on CSI and stupid TV shows like that, but like, that's how they get that kind of information. You see reflections in mirrors, or you see, reflections on, TVs or something, and you can, discern who's taking the photo or people in the room, that kind of thing. So I found that quite interesting. And he was talking about how he works for a PI company, so the information he gets has to be public. So he started talking about, OSINT sites like Pipple and Spokio and sites that have that information. And I've used those from time to time, gathering information on things and people. You can run each of those sites. They give you different things. So one may give you like email address and make you pay for the address, and the other one might give you an address and not necessarily part of a phone number or something. But you can pretty much get that information from other ones. So I was really impressed by that stable talk. I was actually impressed by a lot of the stable talks. I was going to actually go see the information security culture one that Nancy Snoke had on Friday, but I wasn't able to get to that one because I was talking to people, unfortunately. I probably should have gone to more talks than I did, but I guess that gives us a reason to bring them on the show. So
Well, that's true, and we can always watch them online too.
Yep.
Every talk that I'm aware of
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
took place is online
Yep.
for download.
Last week's show, I put in the show notes the link to Iron Geek's DerbyCon 2016. He did a really great job. Some of those talks were up less than an hour after they were given. So that was really awesome, and you could live stream it online as well for a lot of those talks. You were mentioning a couple talks before we started recording. What was the one you were talking about that was so awesome?
Oh, someone named Daniel, who did a lot of research on PowerShell obfuscation.
Yep.
So
Yep.
obviously you can log for PowerShell. It's not by default in Windows, but you can set those. And he found out a bunch of really creative ways to obscure those commands to where you look at it and you say, well, that's gibberish. And that was an amazing talk. I mean, the research he put into that, I think he said he put in 300 hours
Wow.
of research and he published a tool. I think it's on GitHub and written in PowerShell, of course. So, in order to obscure your own commands,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you type in whatever script you want, and then you can. He has a lot of settings to basically obscure that command to where one line can turn into a bunch of code that fills up 2 or 3 pages if you want.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of noisy, but yeah, he has a lot of great ideas and man, he just went so fast because there was so much material. And yeah, he was talking a million miles an hour.
Now, did he say that this stuff was already in the specification? Is this something where we've just failed to RTFM and catch this stuff? I mean, how did he
I don't think it's documented.
Really?
He found it just by trial and error. Yeah.
Huh.
Some of it, I'm sure, is documented, but most of it he came up with most likely on his own, or it's not, documented officially.
Yeah. Yeah, I knew that anything with the word PowerShell in the title was going to be very popular this year. Manifestation, he's a local Seattle guy. I met him the other night. Him and his entire group from Veris came down. They're part of the ATD, which is, I don't want to even try to figure out what ATD is, but it's part of the Veris group, and there's a bunch of them here. And
Isn't that a security company? You stick the sign out in your lawn?
Veris Group's like a really high-end kind of pen testing and analysis firm. Maybe we can have Manifestation on. He can talk about that as well. But that was just one of a number of people. We from Seattle. Dave Weinstein was over there. He's on Twitter. You can find him too. Oseman, of course, he was from Seattle, part of the Sound Security podcast himself. Let's see, who else?
Carlos Perez did a talk on purple teaming, how to do it better.
Yep, that was a good talk. Oh, Carlos Perez, I finally got to meet him and talk to him. Oh,
yeah.
I don't geek out or become fanboy very often,
Yeah.
but I did in fact I might have become a slight fanboy meeting Carlos Perez. I had listened to him for years on Paul Security Weekly, and it was just great to have somebody of his caliber, looking in my general direction, bouncing photons off my face. So that was nice. And of course, McDouglas, saw him. He's working over at BDS, which is the another company under Dave Kennedy's massive wingspan. So we got to talk quite a bit about podcasting, ironically enough. Hopefully, if what he's planning on comes to fruition, that will be another show that I will be listening to on the reg. So
we had a lot of people that listen to this podcast at DerbyCon.
Oh my God.
Just coming up to us and saying, hey, I listened to the podcast. Thanks a bunch for what you do. And just wanted to shake your hand, things like that. Lots of people.
Every time they'd come up and talk to me and they go, hey, you have a great podcast, I'd start sweating in odd places. And I didn't know if they were really talking to me, and they were like, yeah, hey, are you Brian from, and I was like, yeah. And he's like, that's Mr. Betcher. And I was like, yes, that is in fact the Mr. Betcher. I had one guy, he was like, where is Mr. Betcher? He's like, I don't even know what his first name is. And I was like, it's Brian, because we get confused otherwise. So yeah, that was pretty good. But yeah, I thought it was fantastic. If you have the ability to go, and you probably save yourself about $1,000 if you went to DerbyCon over DEF CON or Black Hat, and arguably I would say it's probably a more intimate affair, more family-like environment. I didn't watch Method or Red, but I heard they were good times. Method and Redman were at DerbyCon as well. So yeah. So yeah, I guess before we bring our guest on this week, I want to mention Stephen E. and of course Hayden Transversal. There was a bunch of people that I got to know and meet there. Let me see. Who was so Bill Gardner, his name is Once. We had him on the podcast. He came on ours, the Reboot It podcast. We did our podcast with podcasters, of course. He had some students that came from Marshall with him. And I remember in the vendor area, and I was looking some no starch books over. Of course, I didn't buy any book of them because I already have all of them in ebook format, but I really wanted to. And there was two guys by the name of, wait a minute, there's Tucker and Miles. And I'm telling you, those are some sharp cats. Those are kids that I'm probably going to be, trying to get a job from in about 5 years because they're just really, really sharp kids. Yeah. I tried to be nice to them so that when I do go ask them for a job, they'll remember that I was nice to them. So, but yeah, it was. They asked me what I thought of the Practical Malware Analysis book, and I said, yeah, you definitely should get it. It's the one with the alien on the autopsy table kind of thing. So yeah, that was really good stuff. So, what's your favorite memory from DerbyCon? Because I got one.
I don't know. Talking to Paul Coggin, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, that was a good one.
Yeah,
that was
at the
good
bar.
times.
That was good.
He's a good dude. Yeah.
Yeah, for all the things he had to say, wow. Because he's been there, done that.
That's right.
And he's got a lot of knowledge tucked away in there. So that was good times.
Yep. Yeah, that was we were talking. What was that? Was that was Saturday night? That was Saturday night. That was the same night you were also holding court with those vendor dudes. That was really good stuff. Yeah, that was really good stuff. They're over there going like, well, our stuff automatically detects. Isn't it not working with yours? You're like, no, all malware does not run on XP.
So yeah, it's a place where you might just happen to run into people and then start a conversation and then get stuff done.
That's right.
I mean, he said, hey, those are valid concerns. Here's my email address. Why don't you email me? You know what? I emailed him and he responded, and we're going to set up a meeting. He's already got things floating around on the back end. Mm-hmm. So he's going to talk to some people and set something up with the program managers. And, we're just going to make things better.
Well,
for everybody.
I wasn't going to out people. I just, I found that quite interesting that you raised that question, and I didn't know this, but it's like, I guess that's another detection mechanism. Why does not all malware run on XP anymore?
Well, because there may be some registry keys or some settings or some, comm calls, whatever there is on Windows 7 and Windows 10 that don't exist anymore in XP. Between XP and Vista, there were a lot of changes, right? Okay. It might run on Vista, but some malware does not run on XP anymore. So if you try and test in an XP VM, a lot of modern malware just won't run because those features aren't available to it. And they kind of assume that you're not using XP anymore because we're supposed to get rid of it, right? It's unsupported. So why do you need your malware to run on XP? I mean, realistically, if you're targeting a company that only runs, say, Windows 10, it's not worth it to test it in XP, right?
Is it just like the thing where it detects if you're running like a single core, and usually most VMs run in a single core, so they assume you're trying to analyze them, or it's looking for DLLs that are like, IDA DLLs or something like that, and it knows, oh, there's some reversing engineering software on the computer, so I'm not going to run, or it runs differently. Is that how it works? It notices that you're running PowerShell 2, and it's like, yeah. I don't run on PowerShell 2 because you're running XP. That's naughty.
Yeah, there are, and there's no telling. There are a lot of things that malware can look for that will help determine whether it's being analyzed or not. If you got IDA Pro on your machine, it'll just die.
Yeah.
Right, and delete itself and go away. If you've got development tools, like if you've got an IDE running on or installed on a machine, it may just die because it knows that, hey, this guy is a developer, a reverse engineer, something like that. I'm not going to mess with it because I want to be stealthy. I don't want this guy to know what I'm doing, right? And catch up to me. That's why who was that the guy that got an O-Day on his phone, but he didn't read the text. Remember, it came in as a text. This was news a few months ago. He didn't read the text. He sent the text to a different company, or didn't click the link in the text.
Mm-hmm.
It claimed to be from a whistleblower.
Okay.
Right, from a government whistleblower is what the text claimed to, and it said, "Click this link, and I'll tell you more about what I do." It's a secure whatever. Mm-hmm. So he forwarded that to the security company, and the security company was able to figure out what it actually did, and they found out it was an O-Day. There's big news articles about it. Some podcasts talked about it and such.
Right on.
Yeah. So basically, going back, there's malware that looks at the machine to try and determine whether or not it's going to be a lab box.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. We're definitely. I've got several people underlined here, X'd, where we want to have them on, like Arian J. Evans, James Plager, top 10 2015-2016 compromise patterns observed and why, and how to use non-traditional internet data sets to detect and avoid them. What's another one here? Let's see. Will Schroeder, Matt Nelson, A Year in the Empire. So that's probably a PowerShell Empire review, which is going to be really good to talk about.
Oh man, PowerShell.
Oh yeah, Ben 10's PowerShell talk was very popular. So yeah. All right. Well, hunting for exploit kits. James Desmond. Oh man, I ruined that name. I'm sorry, Joe. I'm sorry. We'll have to have you on so I can apologize. All right. Well, that was a recap of DerbyCon. Like I said, definitely want to reach out and get involved with that next year. Start reserving rooms now, so you'll be able to go next year. So this week we do have a guest. His name is Robert Hurlbut. Robert Hurlbut is an independent software security consultant, and he has a bachelor's of mathematics. He is a Microsoft MVP for developer security and holds the ISC squared CSLLP security certification. He has 30 years of industry experience in secure coding and software architecture and software development. He served as project manager, director of software development, and a chief software architect for several projects. So he has a vast background in secure coding, software development, and he does training. So he has his own independent consulting service. So let's go ahead and bring him on. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Right on. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your origin story, how you got to be an independent consultant and how you got all your years in, software and secure coding.
Sure. Well, I started out many years ago just working as a software developer. That's actually my background, software development. Mm-hmm. And working for different companies. I actually moved around and finally landed in New England. Been here about 20 years now. And when I arrived, I worked at a place for about a year on some telecommunication projects. And after that, I heard about just the opportunities to do some consulting work, which meant really understanding about different projects and understanding about different ways of approaching problems. And I was really interested in that. And so I started doing that more and more through agencies, through companies, working for a consulting company, things like that. So just really learning about what it meant to work with different kinds of customers, different kinds of projects, and really catching that bug, I guess, if you will. It's not just doing development, but also really helping people and really understanding where they're coming from, what their problems are, and evaluating those.
Okay.
And so eventually I became independent, and I've been doing that for a number of years. In terms of security, about 12 years ago or so, I actually caught that bug by reading a little bit about application security. Gary McGraw's book came out around that time, and Building Security In. That was a really interesting book to me. Read that, learned about it, and I just caught it. And I said, hey, this is really important. Even though at the time, most people were talking about network security, not application security per se. And I, like I said, caught the bug, and I just started telling people about it, and learned about threat modeling and started talking about that. And bringing me to the current, that's what I'm focused on a lot, is just continue to talk about secure design, threat modeling to developers, and trying to help them understand about application security.
Do you teach classes?
I do. In the sense, I teach some workshops. Typically, I certainly in the last year or so, I've been called in by companies to hold training and workshops. So I will talk about, for example, threat modeling, what it is, how do you do it, and then divide up some time with different teams to actually go through some threat models, take their applications in particular, whatever that team may be working on, and we'll build out a threat model and try to understand the process. And in turn, the company is learning how can they integrate this into their own way of building software and making sure it's secure.
Now, when you teach secure coding to a developer, do you teach them how to code securely, or do you teach them how not to code insecurely?
That's a good question. When I'm teaching a developer about secure coding, usually I'm trying to show the best ways to do things. There's a lot of examples out there, and sometimes it's hard to discern. Most people will, especially developers in particular, will get answers to how do I do this by doing a Google search, right? And there are all kinds of examples, especially for security, about, for example, how do you store a password securely? And you'll see all kinds of things out there. And I could show a developer, 10 different ways it's wrong, but I'd much rather show the right way the first time. And it helps, I think, when they go then to start looking for stuff, they say, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense what I see there, and help them discern the differences about what's right, what's wrong. So I prefer to show the right ways to do things as opposed to showing all the different ways they shouldn't be doing things.
So does it help to show them what would happen if they don't do it securely?
Sure. I mean, after I've shown some of the right ways, I would say, okay, this is the right way, but here's an example. I'll take one example. Like I said about the SQL injection is, again, a problem we see quite often. And in code, it still shows up in samples. And I'll say, well, here's an example how you don't want to do this, and send in a request to a database by concatenating a string and sending that in, and then it gets executed with your data and the command both going into the database directly, and allowing input to come from somewhere else and perhaps execute against your database directly. So I'll show that. I'll say, what happens? What could possibly happen here? What could go wrong? And I'll show that in a concrete example. But again, talk about here's what you do first, and here's what could go wrong if you didn't.
Okay. So let me ask a question about I have a term that I learned when I was first doing coding. It says, good coders write code, great coders borrow code, other people's code. What does that mean to you when you hear something like that, or somebody mentions that back to you?
So good coders write code and other coders borrow code. Is that did I get it right?
Yeah. Because I mean, you were mentioning that people just go online and get whatever code, and obviously, if they do that, they either don't understand it or they just need a quick fix.
Right. Well, the interesting thing about that, to me, a good coder is somebody who's not just coding but thinking about what they're coding. And if they don't know, they go do some research. They go try to look for the reason for. Let's say, for example, they're looking for a new pattern or trying to implement a new pattern, trying to understand the patterns within the code itself if it's something they've just inherited. Try to understand about writing tests. Try to understand about how do I make sure that my code is successful, not just that it succeeds for this case, but what about a failure case? How would it react? So I guess my response to that would be a good coder is not just someone who writes the code, but also understands the code and structure and wants to dig a little further. And so someone who is just simply copying and not thinking about it, not truly understanding what it really means, to me, that maybe represents several others. But again, that's probably the difference I would say about a good coder and someone who's just copying, pasting, and not really understanding.
Now, here's something you may have run into in different organizations. A developer will say to you, well, they don't pay me to account for every possible contingency, right? They pay me to get something that works out the door as fast as possible. What do you say to that?
Well, and I've heard that before too. I've heard that, for example, certain tools that I may be able to use, free tools that are available, but they don't pay me to go run all those or write tests and verify everything. The reality is, especially if you're if it's an investment in the craft, and my approach is, it's a craft. It's just as much as a person who, takes pride in the work that they do with their hands. If they're building something. I think it's the same way when you're writing good code, is that even though that may not be all that they're paying you for, at the end of the day, hopefully you want something that you're proud of and works well. And so that means paying attention to some of the details and understanding some of the results. Because let's say you're sloppy with building something, what could potentially happen? Well, it can fall apart. If I'm not being careful about all those contingencies, all the edge cases, and you're not going to get all of them, but you're going to get as many as you can think of, the failure cases, the error cases. What happens is when those do happen, now your code is able to stand, it's able to continue to run, it's able to fail quickly and safely, and things like that. Which really ultimately makes a better product. And it saves money, it saves time later on, always does.
Isn't that more a function of the company than the individual developer? I mean, the company has to understand, though, that if they don't give incentives for secure code, they're not going to get secure code, right? If they only give incentives for code that works in a short amount of time, then that's all they're going to get.
Well, yeah, that's true. And that's a good point. And I was actually, just as you were mentioning that, I was just thinking about, there have been a couple of instances where I went into a company as an architect, software architect, hired to design, help build. I was also a developer, a senior developer on the project. But one of the first things I was doing was to try to help developers understand the importance of maybe following an agile methodology, or thinking about testing and how do you write tests and what do you write tests. But what I found, at least in a couple instances, is that it was more you convince us of that as opposed to we're already convinced, and that means management. It means the business. And what I found was that the developers were fine with it. They go, "Oh, this is great. Yeah, we want to do that." But if you don't have the backing of management, if you don't have the backing of the business, instead, who cares about tests? Who cares about, good code? Then it's really difficult, and ultimately, it's not going to succeed. Same thing with security. If the focus by the business, the focus by management is, we just got to get it done, we'll figure out security later. It doesn't matter if the developers want to do that. If the business hasn't backed that up, it's really, really, it can be really difficult to accomplish those goals.
So it's a culture change as well, then, in many cases.
It is, and that's the other thing that, in terms of even the work that I do when I'm working with, if I'm doing threat modeling and helping not just developers but architects and QA and project managers and other people in the business understand, it really is a culture change to think about security. It has to be all the way throughout. It's not just a few people who are thinking about this, just your developers are thinking about secure code and so forth, but it really needs to be across the board that this is really important for all of us to be thinking about security issues and how do we not just write code but also support that code and it's throughout it. So it really is a culture change.
Very cool.
So, okay, when you have some code, and let's say you've done some analysis on it. For simplicity, let's say it's a single developer, and you review their code and you found 50 flaws in their code, right? 50 security flaws. What works and what doesn't work when you approach the individual and say, "Look, we've got an issue here with the way you're coding." I mean, how do you get that point across? Maybe try to get that aha moment.
Well, I think the first thing that I do, and I've had this a couple times. I was called on a project I remember once, or to help a customer where they had some pen tests done, and they came back with quite a few issues, and they were like, we've had this a couple times. We've had this 2 or 3 years. We've had pen tests. And we keep getting the same results. In some cases, we got a result where it was fixed, and the next year it came back again. So we have no clue what's going on here. And so they called me in to evaluate the code itself. Okay, we get pen tests that are bad. What's going on with the code itself? And so I met directly with 2 or 3 developers just to try to understand what's going on. So I've had that situation. And what I did, which seemed to be helpful, I think, was let's take a look at it. Let's understand, the code. We'll look at the code and say, okay, well, I see what the problem is. Can we walk through this and try to understand what it's doing, why it's doing it, understand the results? Let's look at an example of maybe something different and compare. And ultimately what we did is we fixed some of the items that were on the pen test report. And by showing some examples of, oh, that's how you do that. Okay, well, I wasn't really sure. I thought this may be a better way to do this, and I wasn't really sure. What I found is that developers were, I think, pretty happy with the result. That, oh, okay, now I get it. I didn't know that. I didn't realize that. Nobody ever told me that was a different way to do this, and it makes sense. So I think just by sitting with them, not just telling them, go fix it. We can't have this ever show up again. Go fix it. But really sitting with them, understanding how they did the work. Not just saying, hey, you screwed up, man, you're stupid or something. But instead, okay, I see where you did. How about this? What do you think about this way? And let's walk through it. And I said, oh, okay, great. So I think it's really understanding everybody has a different way of learning. Everybody has a different way of trying to understand things. And if you walk with a person and help them understand the better way or a different way that solves the problem. I think it's a great way to not only teach but help them get to the aha moment themselves.
Okay.
Now, when you so it helps to sit down and spend time with the development team to get them to learn how to code securely, and it's an investment in the company to be able to do that, which pays dividends later on. However, sometimes companies choose to outsource their development. Have you seen that work? Have you seen it fail? I mean, I'd like to get your opinions on outsourcing development.
Well, it's just like anything else. It depends on the maturity of the team. I've seen outsourced teams do really well, and the projects worked very well. I've seen outsourced teams do poorly. I think mainly because sometimes communication barriers, sometimes because of specifications that weren't very clear, and especially when you have a remote team that is in a very different time. It's a different time zone. It's sometimes a language and culture barrier, and in trying to communicate, I mean, that's sometimes one of the biggest hindrances is just communicating exactly what we need, and verifying that it was done correctly. If those things are not built in with remote resources, then you may not get the results that you wanted. So just by saying, because it's somewhere else and they're going to do it, and it saves us time because they're working overnight, or however you want to look at it, it still has to be managed, and there are expectations that have to be met in terms of communication, in terms of training. I mean, you still have to make sure that your staff is trained. You have to make sure that they are, doing good quality work, and they are up to, to par to be able to do the work that you request of them. So
you have to. You mentioned training, but how do you when you go in and you found these errors or something? Is the impetus on making sure that they keep the same the issues that they're having don't continue going on, or how do you keep it from making sure that they don't do these things again, and how do you teach the developers that are having these issues from making those issues again? Is it just something as simple as giving them examples, or finding out where they're getting their data from? If the guy's like, well, hey, I'm downloading it from this forum website, I get a lot of my stuff from this site. Is it a retraining effort, or is it do you mentioned rewarding the ones who do better? Is there ways of gamifying the the development process to make it advantageous for developers to improve themselves?
It can be. I mean, that's certainly an approach, and I've seen that work actually pretty well. I mean, if you consider, okay, let's say if you have, we have several bugs, we have 100 bugs or whatever. Mm-hmm. How many could find a good solution and validate that? Well, how do you do that? Well, first of all, let's figure out, how do you identify a bug? How do you test a bug? How do you, and then see those numbers decrease by, various tools that you're evaluating or testing the code to verify that those bugs are fixed, things like that. So then you can certainly, create games that way by saying, if, certain people who are fixing bugs, can we, some kind of reward or something like that. You can certainly do that. Outside of that, just in training alone, I've seen some programs that are set up, just going through the training. So, have different levels. If you go through a basic set of training, that's you get, one kind of mark. And if you go through a more advanced, you get a couple more marks. And then it becomes kind of a competitive game where, okay, how many, who's at a higher level of training now? And so then it becomes a competitive to see who's going to have the best level of training, and the win-win there is that people want to compete. They want to be good at what they're doing, and two, everybody's getting the same training. They're all getting it from the same place, and you hopefully have some consistency there.
Sure. Okay, so for those of you listening, Mr. Betcher had some work-related stuff he had to go, so that's why I was letting him ask a lot of questions before we went on. So, just so that everyone knows, he had to take off. So, he'll be back next week. He just had some change stuff at work he had to deal with. So, so now maybe you could walk through an engagement. So a company calls you up and they go, "Hey, Robert, see what you do online, do a lot of great work. You come highly, recommended from blah, or I saw you where you were speaking at, X conference." When they bring you in, what's the first thing that you do with the developers or with the company itself?
Well, I'll give you an example, for example, the threat modeling workshops. In those cases, it depends on the company, it depends on the culture, it depends on what they're looking for. Recently, I did a series of training and workshops for a company where I met with all their developers. In this case, they had, I think it was 50 to 100 different developers, either in the room or online watching video training, and just presented, extended course of what is threat modeling, what's it about, and answering questions of developers, helping them understand, the concepts. And then we broke into, as I mentioned before, the workshops. Mm-hmm. And in this case, this company was working with essentially microservice teams. And so each part of the full application, the application supported by the entire company, was broken up into lots of different services. And so I met with each team to threat model their particular part of the application, the bigger application, if you will, which was divided up into many different services. And so we would just focus on that service and how does it relate to other things. And we would, in this case, there are many different ways you can do threat modeling. In this case, we followed a stride methodology, mm-hmm. and we used a whiteboard, and they would diagram on a whiteboard, or in some cases, they also had a tool they were using to diagram some of these things. So it depended on the group and whether they had already done a data flow diagram or not. But in some groups, we just diagrammed on a whiteboard some of the main components. We diagrammed some of the data flows between components, and then we would ask the stride questions. Any spoofing or any tampering, mm-hmm. Any of the denial of service or elevation of privilege, and I'm getting them out of order. But anyway, some of the stride questions.
Information
repudiation,
disclosure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the things that and then how do you deal with those things? So, to counter the spoofing, you need authentication, elevation of privilege, you need authorization. Information disclosure, you need some way of verifying your data and in integrity. And so things like that are in confidentiality. So in things like that, we would make sure, do they have the controls in place to handle those types of things? And so we talk about that, and we would talk about any potential threat actors that might be interested in the application, or any assets that may be of interest to an attacker. And so after doing that exercise, we'd finally come out of that with any requirements, anything that we have seen here that we're missing that have now can be turned into a requirement, where we need to go back and evaluate. Okay, we are missing some major things here, or we're storing passwords in a log file for some reason. Somebody mentions that in a meeting, or a lot of times I hear is the cryptography is so bad.
Yeah.
We're using MD5 for passwords because we did that 10 years ago. We've never thought about it, that we ever should change it. We don't have any salt. We don't have, things like that. Like, wow. But it comes up in meetings, and I find that when we do that, again, they become requirements. They become something to potentially change depending on, how critical the threat is. But sometimes what I find, or many times what I find, is that developers, and especially project managers and others who have an investment in the product or in the team, find out things they have no idea. Say, wow, I didn't even know that it worked that way. I didn't know that we're doing that. I just thought everything was fine. And so it's also discovery time. It's it's thinking critically about your security, and so that's another example of ways that I'm helping developers, helping the managers, all the team thinking about these things together in ways they probably never did before.
So how do you ever go in and you ask them, what do your security people think about these things, and they laugh, or they don't have any security people, or security's not really involved in the process? Do you ever run into any companies where security is only after it's out the door when they do the scans on the hosts, or do you have a lot of companies where they're actually looking at integrating security into their release process or their development process?
It varies. And, in some cases, like the one I just mentioned, they actually have security staff they've hired. And so they're in the process of trying to integrate security more into the company. So in that particular case, it is definitely becoming more and more the culture. But I've done a review for a company where it's exactly what you just mentioned, the first thing, which is the network security. We have a firewall. Mm-hmm. We have we're evaluating when people are trying to hit our servers, but we don't know anything about internally what's happening in the applications, because it's still that mentality of the firewall protects us, and whatever else we have inside is we're good, we're okay. In those cases, when I ask those kinds of things, I find that that's a shift as well that they have to go through. And try to make that bridge that gap, that it's not just the perimeter you need to protect, it's also the applications on the inside, because obviously especially it's a web application or any application you're running on the inside, any server, once you get through an open port, it doesn't matter what the firewall is. Yeah. If you're allowing data to come in through an open port and then it's being processed in an application on the inside, that's where your most critical assets are, the data, the database, and so forth, running on the inside, not just what you're trying to protect from coming into the ports that nobody's going to hit anyway because they're already closed.
Yeah. So do you find that you have less to worry about when you walk into a company and they have gotten security integrated into their development cycle than if you don't? I mean, does having security professionals working alongside the devs make the applications more secure, or do you really not see much of a difference?
I have to think about that one.
Because obviously, if there's security professionals involved, or they're actively assisting, the applications or the product that is being put out should be more secure than something where you've just got devs pushing out stuff without,
Sure.
until they start testing on the back end.
Right. Well, I will say, and I've seen this example before, or an actual case where there were security people working pretty closely with devs. They had already gone through the process of doing some evaluation, some help, some fixing, and so forth. So when I came along, they said, we want to just verify everything. And what I did find is that when that has happened, when you've had security people working pretty closely with devs, I did find there were a lot of good stuff that they already had done. Mm-hmm. They already knew this stuff. And so they were already ahead of the game, if you will. They were open to a threat model. They did learn some things, but they weren't so bad that, we're doing everything wrong. It was that the things we did find, we didn't think about, but most things they did. Most things had already been taken care of. And so I find that, and I know others who say the same thing, that when I see a team that has security and dev working together, it does produce, and then maybe it's just a byproduct, I'm not sure, but it definitely seems to produce more secure code, or at least an awareness that may not have been there if you didn't have that situation.
Yeah, I think awareness is important. I mean, if they're not directly involved, just asking the devs questions like, hey, are you sanitizing your inputs? Are you, why are you architecting the the software application like this? Why do you have the proper role-based access? Those kinds of things I think are just enough. As a good starting point to make devs, start thinking more critically about their application. We're getting here a little late into the hour here for the context. I want to talk a little more about the soft skills. So you come in, you've been asked by a company to come in and help your developers. When you're asked to come in, is it under like a, hey, we've just been breached, or hey, we realize that we're falling short on some things, or hey, we have to, be compliant with blah, de blah. I mean, how are you normally called in, and under what circumstances is that?
Yeah, so far it hasn't been after a breach. It's been more everybody else is getting breached. We don't want to be.
Okay. Okay.
That's one, and or two is compliance. We know that we're going to be audited. We know whether we're going to be. We need to verify. We need to make sure that we're meeting the requirements. So that's important. Those are a couple things that are typically, but I've not so far been called in after a breach. It's been, that other company that's similar to us got breached. How can we be sure that we're not going to be next?
Yeah. What compliance frameworks are we talking? Are we talking like PCI? Or are we talking?
PCI, HIPAA are
HIPAA?
The other two.
Maybe SOX, SOX, not SOC? Anything like that?
Some. I mean, I've done a lot of healthcare work, and so that's been my background. I've also done a lot of financial, so that's some of the companies I get called by. So those are two of the ones that I've dealt with quite a bit.
Okay, so you're not coming in, hair on fire, fix us. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the soft skills when you come in. Obviously, there are different mentalities when dealing with not just with individual people's personalities, but with like positional authorities and those kind of things. How do you handle, developers who maybe don't get it? Why do we need to be secure? Or my code, I don't have bugs in my code. My code is good. I mean, how do you work and help these folks understand? That they may have some deficiencies. I don't want to say that they're all, AFU, but that they're, how do you help them understand their deficiencies and help start working through them without getting, if you push them over too far, they're going to, freeze, or they're going to stop wanting to contribute. Or, I mean, how do you work with varying personalities in these kinds of organizations?
Well, in terms of security, what I find is that even those developers who, I guess for lack of a better word, may not have much of a clue about security, still are interested in writing secure code. I mean, they want to write good code.
Yeah.
And so I will tap into that and, ask them about, what excites you? What is interesting to you about this job? What is interesting to you about, why did you get into this in the first place? What was it about development versus anything else you could have been doing? Now, I might get weird answers, money was good, or, I couldn't do anything else, so I came here. I don't know. You might get some strange answers, but most of the people that I've ever talked to The main reason is I just love coding. I love developing something. I love seeing the finished product. I love seeing, something that looks great. And then when we talk about, ways to write things correctly and ways to write things incorrectly, and they understand that, we can talk about, what if you did this? Well, that's kind of dumb. Why would you do that? Well, exactly. But you don't, right? The difference between writing something that works well, and as you try it out and it fails, you fix it, you try it again, and it fails, you try it again, and it finally succeeds. You'll remember that the next time when you come across that problem. You'll think, oh, that's how I did that. I know how to solve that. And I say security is very similar. You're learning, but one difference is that, when you're writing code, you're writing it to work correctly the first time. Sometimes with security, you're writing it so that, it will also still work, or it will fail correctly if it fails. And what does that mean? Well, we always write, at least, for developers, they're always writing code for something, or they're writing a software in some way or some application so that it works. They don't ever think about the possibility of someone trying to misuse it to make it break in order to compromise it. And so that's a very different way of thinking. But it's also a different way of writing code. And so what I find for most developers who want to write good, secure code, and what does that mean, is here's a different way of writing code that handles the error cases. What happens if it fails? Well, my code doesn't fail. What happens if it fails? Okay, well, if it fails, I don't know. I haven't thought about that. Well, let's think about that. Yeah. And so my approach is to appeal to, what made this exciting, and it's those aha moments when you see a developer who's now figuring out, actually, if I can make this work so that even when it's being attempted to be broken, it still works, or it still handles it, or it still bounces back. Well, that's kind of fun. Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I actually like that. And so I, try to appeal to what makes this fun? What makes this interesting? What's a challenge that I could take on here to do something, that I can be proud of, that works well, and I've learned a new technique, and it's fun, it's interesting. And that's been my approach, and I find for most developers, especially if this is why they got into the business itself, is because it's just fun. They really want to do it. They want to learn. They want to know the best ways to do things. Here's a way to do this particular thing. Cool. And so that's been my approach, and that seems to have worked pretty well. And especially as my background coming from, I've been doing this for a number of years myself, and it's made a difference for me to learn. I always want to learn from others who do it well. And I find others, they want to learn it from someone who does something well, and it really helps to, to move people along that way, that it's something they want to do anyway. And let's help them continue to do that and give them the tools and the skills to be able to do that.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about the threat modeling that you come in with. You use the stride model. We had a podcast. Oh God, it's been better than 6 or 8 months ago. It's probably back in 2015. We talked about the stride and dread models. I believe there was a third one as well that I'll have to look up again. So you do a lot of talking. You do a lot of conferences and a lot of speaking about threat modeling. And I'm reading one that you're going to be doing on March 1st of next year, and they says you'll learn practical strategies and threat modeling for secure software design. So when you come in and you do these after these threat models, what are some of the practical strategies that you work with the developers on? Is it just strictly what can go wrong with your software, or do you do a whole architectural analysis and go, okay, look, you shouldn't have, you should have a 3-tier design, you should be, web servers in the DMZ. Do you go through all of that as well, and which would require them to maybe make some major changes to their application? How do you what are some really quick wins, like when you're first starting out with these folks that will get them, very little effort but maximum, gain? I mean, how that's what I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out is what is some really simple strategies that they can do that will maximize the output that you get from them.
Sure. Well, I think one of the first things is, to think about some of the misuse cases, because again, especially when you're looking at it from a business perspective and how do I build this thing? We always build for success. That's our first thing. We always build for success.
Okay.
And that's not bad. That's good.
Yeah.
But the first thing is to try to understand what is a misuse case. What are the ways that somebody might do something different than what you had intended, and how to think like that. And that's a very different way of thinking. So that's the first thing. Secondly is just to think about some of the ways that, in terms of a data flow diagram or how data flows in your system. Data is one of the most critical things in our applications. It is most sensitive. It's what typically an attacker is most interested in because it contains all the information, intellectual property. It contains personal information, financial information. So another way of a quick win is where's that data going? Where's it being stored? How are you storing it? So think about that in terms of your design. Are you storing it in a secure way? Are you using the proper encryption? Are you, how are you authorizing someone to be able to access this data? Who can access this data? How are you verifying the identity of the people who are coming in to use that data and so on? So just those things, those questions, and that's the other thing is just to help a developer ask those kinds of critical questions about their design, about what they're doing. That could happen in a sprint if they're doing an agile methodology. You come up with, as a user, I want to do something. Well, what's the misuse case, and how am I making sure that whatever data I'm handling is being treated as sensitive data, and how is it, how am I verifying it? How am I verifying who's using it, and those kinds of things? Ask those questions.
Nice. So you have to get them to kind of step back and not think as a developer in this case. You'd want them to think as, well, you mentioned, think of how you would, interact. You would want to think differently. So you're trying to make them almost think like hackers would for cases of misuse. Why would you put F number of, balls in my application? I wouldn't put an F, you put a number or something. Or I'm sure you introduced some of the technologies like web interception proxies and those kinds of things, because they think, the request can't be modified once it's submitted. And then you show them something like Burp and where you can, change that stuff. Do you show them that kind of technology as well?
Not always. I have done that. It just depends on that kind of a talk. If it's more on a tools talk, or if it's more on just web dev, for example, in general. If it's threat modeling, it's actually moving back and thinking as opposed to the way that the tools work. We talk about, we may talk about, well, here's how you can prove some of those things. Like you might run a fuzzing tool of some sort that sends a lot of data. And here's some examples, but I may not always get into those specific tools. It's more the concepts. It's more that, like you just said, stepping back and thinking differently about your application. Now, some can say, well, it's like an attacker. I've heard both sides about that, where you say, well, you can't teach anybody to be an attacker if you don't know how to be an attacker yourself. I mean, that's crazy. That's not something you teach. I've heard that. I've heard, well, that's what we got to do. We've got to make them think like attackers. And I'm kind of in the middle on it. I think that if you can help them think of some specific questions or types of questions, you're already halfway there. And then the rest of it is, how do I deal with that if I run into that situation where the question is, no, we don't have that? Well, then I need to know the controls, and I need to know how to develop them, and I need to know how to support them. And so I come at it from both angles, where some basic questions. I may not know how to be an attacker, but I do know how to ask some critical questions. And on the other hand, I know also how to make sure the controls are in place if my answer is, no, they're not there. I'm not doing anything.
Yeah. No, that's cool. So earlier, Mr. Betcher asked about, code and stuff. Are there any good sites where you recommend them to go for good examples on how to write proper code?
That's a good question.
Well, I mean, you can, there must be some best practices out there. I mean, obviously it wasn't in their university class. Well, maybe it wasn't. I mean, but.
Well, I guess probably the reason I said it's a good question is because probably my number one is, especially if you're doing web application, is OWASP. There are a lot of good resources out on OWASP. If they're looking for a lot of good questions to ask, I know you've covered this before in one of your podcasts, ASVS. Mm-hmm. I think Bill Senf talked about that.
That's right.
That's another great set of questions to ask of your application beyond the OWASP Top 10. OWASP Top 10 is a great place to start, but it's not everything. And I like the ASVS because you can get a lot further and deeper into lots of areas to cover in your application. Mm-hmm. So those are some, and then also there's proactive controls that come from OWASP as well about, how do I start building some things in to my application? So that's one great source I like to point to. Nice. Developers.
Yeah, there's also I think the CWE Common Weakness Enumerators that goes I find OWASP gets like the top 10 basically, but there's over like 800 of these common weakness enumerators that are out there. So when you're creating your application, you kind of want to look through these and see if there are any that fit your application. Those are others that you can look at to ward against, because the top 10 are great, but there's what happened to there's 11 through 20 or something. Those are still ones that are out there that you can be hit by, but maybe they're less well known. Maybe they're a little more esoteric.
Yeah, and that's a good resource as well. The key though on that or any of these is that also it couples with training, because and there's really some good training out there as well. Some I know Pluralsight has some, others have some online training. There's some security courses you can go through that help you understand how to interpret, because you can read those reports about, there's this vulnerability, but how do I fix it? Okay, yeah. I know it's there probably, but how do I fix it? And so you need to couple that information, great information, with, okay, in my particular language of choice or my particular environment, how do I fix that thing? And so that's where the training comes in.
Yeah, keeping up to date on various vulnerabilities is always important. If you're using a WordPress or something, you need to know, you're a developer, you're going to be installing plugins that'll help you enhance your own work, but you need to know what those plugins are going to do to your code and, what happens if, they open up vulnerabilities, because they do from time to time. So it's good to know your environment as well. Yeah, that's important.
Definitely.
Yep. Well, Robert, you do quite a bit of speaking apparently here. You are a very popular man on your page. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about where you're going to be speaking in the next 3-4 months.
Sure. Well, actually, this coming weekend I'll be at the OWASP Boston conference doing a threat modeling workshop. I'll have half day of that where, very similar, doing some teaching, and we're going to do some actual threat modeling as well as look at one of the tools, the Microsoft threat modeling tool. I'm going to be demoing that, and we'll kind of do a hands-on with that one just to see how it works. Mm-hmm. And then, let's see, coming up I have, I'm trying to think, I have another, I know I'm speaking somewhere else soon, and then some user groups I'm doing locally. I usually do that quite a bit, but that's the most current one is the conference coming up this weekend.
And that's in Burlington?
In Burlington, Mass. Yes.
Okay, cool. Throughout modeling workshop. Yeah, and then it looks like November 17th, Western Mass Development Technology Users Group. So you do a lot of
Right.
stuff in the Massachusetts area.
Yeah, Massachusetts, Connecticut, which is where I'm based.
Okay, right on. Yeah, it's a good part of the country. It's a good part of the country. All right. Well, if people wanted to get a hold of you, obviously you have a website. Is there any other way that you can people can get a hold of you?
Sure, I've got a Twitter account, Robert Hurlbut, and also recently started another podcast, on application security with Chris Romeo.
Yep.
From Security Journey, and that's been really great. We've got a few out there. We're really trying to help developers and QA and others understand about application security.
Very cool. And that's www.appsecpodcast.org. You guys, you guys just started. It's you've done one a week. You're trying to do one a week now?
Right. We've got a few episodes we've done, and they're going to come out once a week. So we've got 3. The third one just came out this week.
Cool. All right. Yeah, they're on iTunes, Android, Google Play. They have an RSS feed. So yeah, hit that website and download those. I definitely will take a listen to those. So, all right. And of course, your website is roberthurlbut.com. HURLBUT.com. So Robert.
That's
Hurlbut.
it.
Excellent. All right. Well, Robert, thank you for joining us this week. I appreciate you coming on. I know this has been a long time in coming. We've been talking since like June or so. So,
right.
Yeah. It sucks. We get busy and, other things happen, and DerbyCon showed up. Do you go to DerbyCon? Do you go to Black Hat or DEF CON or the RSA or anything like that?
I have been. This year I did not get to those. I did get to, what was it? I went to an ISC Squared conference, but I have been to DEF CON, RSA, been to Black Hat. DerbyCon I have not been to. I was actually looking to try to do that, and it sold out, and I missed it, but I'd love to go sometime.
Oh, well, you could always you can always get in our contest next year. We're going to probably buy some more tickets and do a giveaway like we did last year. So
very cool.
Keep an eye out. So right on.
Will do.
All right. Well, thank you, Robert, for joining us. And so if you are you're a regular listener of the podcast, this is where we talk about where you can find us. Mr. Betcher is @BetcherPwned. BOETTCHPWNED on Twitter. You can find me @Brian Brake, BRYANBRAKE. The official podcast Twitter is @BrakeSec, BRAKESec. We're on. We have a website, www.breakingsecurity.org. You can hit us up there. We're on iTunes. Thank you. Oh, yeah, we got a lot of new iTunes feedback. I appreciate everybody who's been adding feedback on iTunes. We're up to 20 pieces of feedback now, which is awesome because it was up from about 13 a month ago or 2 months ago. So we appreciate all the positive feedback on there. We're on the Android. We're on the Play Store, the Google Play Store. We're on Player.fm, we're on TuneIn Radio app, we're on SoundCloud, we have a Tumblr, we don't update it, I think it just has the episodes, but you can still follow us on any of those. We have an RSS feed, of course, so there's pretty much no way that you can not get a hold of us, or you really have to try hard to not have a way of getting our podcast. So if you are interested in comments or feedback, giving those, our email is bds.podcast@gmail.com. So thank you, Mr. Betcher, for coming on. I'd also like to thank all the people from DerbyCon. I know we talked about this earlier. We've had a blast at DerbyCon, but I want to thank all the people who are listening because they found us on DerbyCon or we got a card from them. You are the reason we do this podcast. And people like Robert are the reason why we do this podcast, too, because we like to share the information of our fellow brothers and sisters in the information security community. So please feel free to hit any of the 150 previous episodes we've done. We want to hear any feedback you've got. So thank you for listening. This has been Brian and Mr. Betcher for Breaking Down Security. Have a great week, and we will talk to you again soon.